I too pay my respects to the Gummidge people and acknowledge that we're on your new land. I have a particular interest in government expenditure as it affects Indigenous people in the Northern Territory because we're a society and inequality and injustice affects us all. As Bob's told you, the Commonwealth Grants Commission apportions the GST revenue between the states and territories and how it does it to enable equal service delivery across Australia, assuming equal starting points. And assessing on past expenditure plus remoteness, indigeneity, all those sorts of things. And at the end of each year, each state and territory reports back to the Grants Commission its actual spending in each of the categories that have been assessed under what's called the Uniform Presentation Framework, which ensures that you're comparing apples with apples. And those returns get published together with the original Grants Commission assessments. Now, as a bit of background, in the 1990s and the 2000s, the NT government significantly underspent in respect of the Commonwealth Grants Commission assessments in particular areas that relate to social justice and welfare. And Bob alluded to differences of opinion a couple of years ago. In 2006-07, those Grants Commission figures showed underspending on those social justice and welfare areas as compared to the Grants Commission assessments of $522 million. 654 million spent against assessments of 1,176 million. Bucket loads of money. 2009-10, that underspending had reduced to 356 million. Whoopie-doo. 2014-15 to 334 million. So there's a long and consistent pattern of underspending. The most recent figures available are for 2015-16, and I can report underspending of 137 million in the welfare category. And in housing and justice, there was even a little bit of overspending. But in context, that was in an overall budget overspend of 588 million. So there you go. You must remember that the Grants Commission assumes an equal starting point. And there've been many, many years of underspending. And over the years, the NT government has responded to this sort of comment by claiming high levels of spending on Indigenous Territorians. So last year, I undertook a 3-stage reverse engineering process to determine the proportion of NT expenditure that the Grants Commission considers should be applicable to Indigenous Territorians. The result, 68%. The Indigenous Expenditure Review, prepared by the NT government, 53%. Difference on 3.4 billion, around $500 million. But however shocking and distressing that might be, it still doesn't tell the whole story. The reported spending on the various categories of expenditure include the salaries and expenses of the NT Public Service employed in the relevant areas. So let's look at the NT Public Service in the GST era. In 2003, and I've got the precise figures, there were 14,538 full-time equivalent positions for a population of 201,725. By 2016, 20,596 full-time equivalent positions for 244,900 population. Population increase, 21.4%. Public service increase, 41.7%. That's, to be precise, 2,947 positions over and above population increase. Say 400 million a year. You know, just got my wallet here somewhere. But wait, there's more, Bob. The NT Public Service Commissioner's 15-16 report tells us that 39.4% of the NT Public Service is in the administrative stream, managerial and clerical, over 8,000 people. Obviously you have to have some admin people, but typically the NT government allows funded organisations to spend 10 or 15% on admin. So 39.4 is a bit excessive. I would have thought. What can we do? Well, as Bob said, there's this Productivity Commission inquiry, which I see as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. As Bob said, they missed the deadline for submissions, and perhaps that was because they didn't have enough admin staff. The draft report of that commission, that inquiry, is due in early October, and further submissions were originally due 30th of June. Further submissions can be lodged after the draft report, and the final report is due early in 2018. I urge you to consider making a submission, particularly if you represent significant organisations. Another thing that's happened recently is that the Minister, Nigel Scullion, has announced that under the Indigenous Advancement Strategy, the funding of non-Indigenous organisations will be phased out. Now, that won't include the NT government, obviously, because the IAS is a different bucket from the GST distribution, but the principles involved is relevant. So let's put these things together and think about some possible strategies. We could ask for greater transparency in NT budgets and reporting, or alternatively, we could ask the Grants Commission to disclose it themselves. We could ask for grants for the benefit, or the distribution for the benefit of Indigenous people be in the form of tied grants. That's another possibility. There is a desperate need for an independent statutory monitoring body that can analyse and report on the budgets and subsequent expenditure of each state and territory as they affect Indigenous people, with specific reference to the Grants Commission assessments and also to geographic fairness. But there's another possibility which combines those things and goes beyond them. The Public Service Act allows for the establishment of new government agencies, and such an agency could be established, say, for this Yolngu region on which we stand. Funds intended for this area could be redirected to that agency, which could be created by an executive order, signature on a bit of paper. Obviously be subject to normal monitoring and review in any particular such agency, but similar agencies could be set up in various areas. It would bypass the problems I've talked about. It would give local control of spending priorities. Earlier sessions have talked about the need for coordination locally. What an opportunity. Wouldn't replace the NT government, but simply transfer some responsibilities and the associated funds. So I'm suggesting that the Productivity Commission inquiry and the Minister should be petitioned along these lines, with tied funding and greater transparency and independent monitoring body. It's a once-in-a-generation opportunity and we shouldn't waste it. Thank you.